Good evening, dear students. Welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 5th January 2025, and today we have some important articles for the discussion. And one by one, we'll try to discuss all these important articles in a very detailed manner. So please remember, along with the news articles which are important and which are covered in different newspapers, we also have one current affairs based mains practice question as well. So we'll try to solve it as well, and we'll try to understand the structuring and presentation part of this particular mains answer as well. So without any further delay, let's get into the discussion. And the first question that we are going to discuss, it is a mains based question, and this is about the self-help group women's role in fighting nutrition, undernutrition in India or malnutrition in India. So we all knew that nutritional deficiency is one of the major problem that India has been facing. So it is very important that at the decentralized level, or at the grassroots level, we need to fight malnutrition, because in India, so more than 50% of the women have been suffering with anemia problem, and even a lot of children are undernourished, stunted, wasted. So this is primarily because of the food that we have been taking lacks essential nutrients. So therefore it is very important that we need to emphasize on nutrition. So it is actually based on an article, and this article is about the public health nutrition policies need precise targeting. So that based on that particular article, so there is a question, and in fact this is a very important topic, because this kind of a questions you can expect in Gender Studies paper 1 as well as Gender Studies paper 2 as well. Now the question here is that women self-help groups, they can actually play a significant role in tackling malnutrition. Now we all knew that malnutrition or undernutrition is a very serious problem in India, and self-help groups can actually have a lot of potential to play a significant role in tackling or addressing the problem of malnutrition by combining the economic empowerment of women, education, and even the community engagement more proactively. Right. So in this context, we need to identify, so we need to mention some data with respect to malnutrition in India. Now what are the major causes of such a malnutrition that has been taking place in India? You could just describe this in a micro diagram, and you can also write the implications of such a malnutrition and how self-help group women can actually play a large role in addressing the problem of malnutrition in India. And apart from that, you could also suggest a way forward as well. So this is how you need to structure the answer. So it is very important that you need to divide the question into multiple parts and try to address each part with a specific content, and that's how you could score good marks in this answer. And apart from that, you could also mention data, you could also mention relevant examples, or if you find any case studies, you could also mention them, and also you could make a diagram in the answer itself, and that's how you could actually score a very good marks in your examination, particularly for the mains exam. So as I have already told you that when you're writing introduction, so in the introduction itself, it is important that you need to define malnutrition. What exactly is malnutrition? So in a very simple words, you just try to define malnutrition, and then you should try to give some data with respect to the women who have been facing the problem of anemia. You could also talk about children who are facing stunting, wasting, and all those problems. So you could mention such data. Now generally what happens if you mention such data, it would be more impactful, it would be more effective compared to the other answers. So that's how you could get an edge when examiner has been reading the introduction. Now you just have to define malnutrition. So malnutrition is generally a condition where the body lacks essential nutrients such as vitamins, minerals, and other essential components. So because these minerals are very important, because they play a significant role in maintaining healthy tissues and organs as well. And in fact, so this usually occurs, malnutrition as a phenomena usually occur among people who are undernourished or overnourished. So you might have heard about hidden hunger, right? So hidden hunger is also close closely aligned with the malnutrition. Now generally in hidden hunger, what happens is that we have been providing food grains to every eligible beneficiary, every individual who is below poverty line, as part of National Food Security Act of 2013. So that's fine. But whatever food that we have been providing through public distribution system to eligible beneficiaries, so that food is lacking essential nutrients, and essential nutrients are very important. But food is lacking essential nutrients. So in the absence of essential nutrients, it would lead to the problem of malnutrition among children, pregnant women, lactating mothers, and even the adolescent girls as well. And even it also leads to anemia or iron deficiency among women. So therefore it is very important that we need to address the malnutrition. So we need to ensure that the food that we have been providing should have adequate amount of vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients, and that's how we could actually fight malnutrition and the associated issues, particularly stunting, wasting among children, and even anemia problems. So according to some data provided by the UNICEF, in India around 57 lakh children who are below 5 years of age have been suffering with severe wasting problem, right? So there are two conditions which are being associated with the malnutrition, particularly among children. One is wasting and other is stunting, right? Stunting and wasting. So stunting generally means low height compared to age, low height compared to a child's age. So that is what is known as stunting, child stunting. Now what is child wasting? So child wasting is low weight compared to height. So this is what is known as wasting, and this is stunting. So these are two conditions which are being associated with the malnutrition itself. Now here, according to some UNICEF data, 57 lakh children have been suffering with severe wasting. So here, what is wasting? So low weight compared to the height of a child, right? So this is particularly alarming because 57 lakh children, so it is not a small number, right? So it is just about the wasting. What about stunting? What about children who are undernourished? What about children who who are not getting adequate vaccination or immunization? So all these problems that children have been facing, and they continues to be a threat, and this would further increase the infant mortality rate as well. And in fact, in the year 2017, National Health Survey has also reported that approximately 19 crore people, there are around 19 crore people in the country, and they were compelled to sleep empty stomach every night. So you can imagine the quantum of people that are going to sleep with a empty stomach. So even though the government says that food grains are being provided free of cost under the public distribution system to every eligible beneficiary under Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana, right? So we all knew during COVID-19 pandemic. So as part of Atmanirbhar package, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has launched Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana. So under this program, every eligible beneficiary will be provided free food grains, right? So despite food grains are being provided, despite the portability, portability was implemented recently because it could address the problem where migrants from one state they go to another state for work purpose. Now earlier they did not get the benefits of public distribution system, but nationwide portability of ration card ensure that these migrant workers, even if they migrate to other states also, they could get the food grains, and to some extent that will help address the problem of hunger and malnutrition, right? So now, what are the consequences of malnutrition? So it is very important for us to understand the consequences of malnutrition because it has a wide variety of consequences, right? So consequences on the health of children, health of pregnant women, adolescent girls, and apart from health, educational outcomes of children, and even the cognitive development of children, so after birth, right? So physical development of children after birth. So we need to take into account all these implications or the consequences of malnutrition. Now malnutrition actually results in a reduced ability to work, right? So whenever people are suffering with the malnutrition or they are having a problem, for example, they do not get adequate nutrition, so that would make them weak, and it would further reduces their ability to work, and it would also further increases their susceptibility or their vulnerability to more and more diseases because of lack of essential nutrients, right? For example, they would get anemia, right? So lower levels of blood, and even blindness. So this is also known as iron deficiency, right? So this is also called as iron deficiency, and it could even lead to the blindness and even mental retardation, and to sometimes it even leads to the death of the individual as well. So this is the first consequence, and the second consequence is undernutrition increases the risk of infections as well, or there are a lot of diseases. So when you lack adequate immunity, when you are weak, so those diseases will impact you. For example, tuberculosis is one such example. Apart from tuberculosis, pneumonia is another disease which could impact a healthy individual. So if he's having deficient nutrient intake, and malaria is also another disease. So most often these diseases very often lead to the death of the individual as well. And apart from that, the chronic malnutrition can further impair a young child's physical and mental development. So imagine that for any young child, after the birth and after the pre-education, so it is very important that in the primary levels, in order to develop his cognitive abilities, the child should get adequate nutrition along with the immunization as well, because that plays a very important role in developing his cognitive abilities, and cognitive abilities further lay a strong foundation for the foundational literacy as well as numeracy, and that ultimately decides the educational outcomes of the children or the student at the younger ages, right? So therefore all these factors are being determined by the nutrition. So whether you are getting adequate nutrition or not, so if you are getting adequate nutrition, so then there will be less infant mortality rate, less maternal mortality rate, and health of women could be substantially improved. And apart from that, the learning outcomes of the children can also be substantially enhanced. Particularly the adolescent girls' health can also be enhanced significantly. So if we are giving right amount of nutrition to everybody, right? For example, midday meal scheme is one such scheme that the government has launched to ensure that everyone gets adequate amount of nutritious intake every day, along with enhancing the enrollment ratio in the schools as well, right? So now apart from that, there are some other consequences. In fact, so as we have already discussed, we have understood how malnutrition has a worst or severe impact on women, particularly the pregnant women, because due to malnutrition it would lead to the problem of anemia. So anemia would further leads to other issues among women, right? So therefore undernutrition actually puts women, particularly pregnant women, under a greater risk of further developing new complications, and it could even lead to the death as well during the delivery, right? Because it could obstruct labor, and it could also causes hemorrhage as well. So they may lead to the death of a woman during the pregnancy or even during the time of delivery. And apart from that, in India, if you look at undernutrition, so undernutrition is widespread in almost all categories of children, and that is a major concern. And in fact, the major reason for such a higher levels of undernutrition is that the food that the children have been taking lack nutrients, and that is the major problem. And in fact, in future, that could certainly impact or impede the socio-economic development of our country, and it could also impact the potential to reduce chronic cycle of poverty, right? now understand that still poverty is one of the major problem in India, because most number of poor people are living in India. So in this context, for a nation and for the government, it is a priority to bring people out of the chronic cycle of poverty. But if we are not able to provide a nutritious food, or it would lead to hidden hunger, so we could not ensure that the people could come out of the chronic cycle of poverty. But it is very important that nutrition is a very important dimension that we need to take into account. And in fact, it is also expected that every year India is losing 4% of its potential GDP because of the problem of malnourishment. So malnourishment has resulted that India has been losing around 4% of its GDP almost every year. So 4% of the GDP is not a small number, because even now also we are not spending at least 3% on the healthcare itself. It is still less than 2% of the GDP. But because of malnutrition, India has been losing around 4% of its GDP. So therefore, this is the issue that a deep introspection is required from the government side. And now we'll try to understand what role self-help group women can actually play in addressing this problem. Because if you take into account the problem of malnutrition, now according to 2011 census, how many people are living in the rural areas? So around you could say that around 71% of the people have been living in the rural areas, right? So this is a huge number of people still living in the rural areas. And in fact, when we talk about stunting, wasting, and other problems of malnutrition, along with the most number of women with the problems of anemia, it is mostly prevalent in the rural areas, particularly at the grassroots level. So therefore, we need to have a dedicated and committed band of workers who could specifically work at the grassroots level to ensure that the malnutrition problem could be addressed, right? And they undertake a series of information, education, and communication related activities to empower women to create knowledge, right? So to create positive behavioral change with respect to nutrition, so that their health can be improved a lot. So this dedicated and committed band of workers could be the self-help group women, right? So they could be the self-help group women. So they are considered as one of the fast emerging across the country. They are not specific to one single state, but they are fast emerging. And in fact, the self-help group could be an ideal platform to bring in effective change in the rural areas, particularly with respect to health and nutrition related behaviors among women. And that is very important here. Now, women should be a key decision makers at the family level, because they can also take care of nutrition related aspects for the children as well, right? So therefore, self-help group can actually play a tremendous role in this context. And in fact, we have discussed that the self-help group is an emerging platform, and that has the potential to address or to change the behaviors of women with respect to health and nutrition. And in this context, the self-help groups can directly reach the local woman. They can directly reach the local population, particularly a tailored group of population: pregnant women, lactating mothers, adolescent girls, and local schools. So they can approach these targeted sections because they are more vulnerable, and they could create a lot of they would try to impart the knowledge with respect to health and nutrition and the negative consequences if they are not getting adequate nutrition. So therefore, so they could take this issue of health and nutrition at the grassroots level, and they could they could empower women by educating them, by communicating the knowledge with them, and also advising them, and also referring or also linking them with the local hospitals as well, because you also require adequate medical care as well, medical attention as well. And so they could be actually a bridge between the primary health care or primary, secondary, or tertiary health care, or even at the normal people. So particularly empowering or educating them. So in addition to these platforms, In addition, these platforms are often specifically aimed at the poor and marginalized sections of the society who are living in the rural areas, because we all knew that poor and marginal sections or the marginal groups are more vulnerable to these kind of problems, and they could be also considered as a target group. Now, because of that reason, it is very important that the self-help group women should reach to such sections, right? So that's a one step forward to address the problem of malnutrition, and increase awareness about the nutritious food and nutrition food intake habits. Now finally, through the activities of self-help groups, it would also result in financial inclusion, right? So financial inclusion is also very, very important. Now, what is a financial inclusion? A financial inclusion is women having access to savings, right? So they having access to savings and pensions, and apart from pensions, having access to institutional credit, and having access to insurance, right? So that would bring in a substantial change for women, particularly that would support women their role in agriculture, and that would further strengthen their livelihoods, and it would also support women, because women at the grassroots level, particularly through the self-help group, they are already building a kind of a social capital, and that is very important for the all-round development of a nation. Particularly, it would result in inclusive growth and development. Along with inclusive growth and development, it would also result in achieving all the sustainable development goals by the year 2030, right? So India is also expecting that it has to achieve sustainable development goals by 2030. So therefore, self-help group at the rural level plays a very, very important role, and in fact, the rural self-governance as an ideal can be achieved by the self-help group, and in fact, this is what is envisioned by Mahatma Gandhi, right? So in this context, what more can be done? What should be the way forward in this context? When we talk about the way forward, so government programs on malnutrition can be implemented through self-help groups. So there's no doubt that whatever programs that we have, we could converge those programs, convergence of the ministries, convergence of existing welfare programs, and identifying self-help groups as a key stakeholders is very important for the successful implementation of these nutrition programs or programs on malnutrition and achieve Poshan Bharat goal. And in fact, constant and enduring structural hand-holding is also very, very important for the self-help groups, particularly training them, and particularly making them an important stakeholders in the government policy formulation or even government policy implementation. So this is very, very important, right? So frequent awareness camps must be organized in rural areas by the rural development authorities to create awareness about the different schemes that the government has launched with respect to malnutrition, and periodic capacity building of all members to make the group a collective group. So all these measures have been undertaken. So apart from that, if you have any other measures, you can write those measures as well, right? So that's how you can actually address this particular question. Now we have some important articles which are given in different newspapers, so we'll try to discuss those important news articles. So we'll also try to extract some information which is very important for our examination. Now the first article is Manipur violence and exploring solutions. We all knew that recently Manipur has got a new governor. Now the background of Manipur's violence is that there are ethnic tensions in Manipur because of number of reasons. So it could be called as an insurgent movement, or movement for secessionism, a movement for illegal immigration, or a violence or the conflict between two ethnic groups, and that has later turned a violent movement, right? So still violence in Manipur continues. There's no doubt about that. So however, earlier we have discussed about the Manipur violence. In one such discussion, the author was telling us that it is important to identify a man of integrity, and he should be appointed as a governor of the state of Manipur, so that he could better deal with the problem that is existing in Manipur, right? So he at that point of time suggested either the retired army general can be appointed as the governor, or he also suggested that anyone who is retired from Indian police service or something like that, he suggested. So he should be a man of integrity, so that he could identify the potential areas where one should work to address the problem that is existing in Manipur. So Manipur governor, so recently former cabinet secretary Ajay Kumar Balla has been appointed as the governor of Manipur, so to address, the central government believe that he is a former cabinet secretary, right? So therefore there will be a better way to address this problem that is existing in Manipur, and that's why so Manipur has got a new governor. And after he was being appointed as a governor, he held a security review meeting, right? So he held a security review meeting with all necessary officials, and his prime concern, right? So the reason for conducting such a security review meeting is to address state's law and order situation, particularly the law and order situation which is existing in the border areas of Manipur. Now we all knew that Manipur has been sharing a border with Myanmar, and Myanmar currently is under a military rule, and that has also fueled the current problem in Myanmar, because of it has been one of the source of illegal immigration from Myanmar to Manipur. So we all knew that Northeast India is a volatile region. So because of volatility of Northeast India, so all these problems further adding fuel to the fire. And in fact, Manipur governor Ajay Balla urged use of all existing legal measures. Particularly he suggested the use of National Security Act of 1980. National Security Act is one of the most potential act, so that could be used to quell this violence. So he suggested that use National Security Act of 1980 against those people who are being considered as troublemakers, and he also emphasized on creating employment opportunities for the misguided youth. So there are a lot of misguided youth, and I would say, so whenever youth don't get employment opportunities, there's a higher probability that this content would be further channelized this way, and that would further leads to the large scale violence. So therefore he emphasized on imposition of National Security Act, detaining or arresting people who are creating this problem, and also looking for the ways such as creating employment opportunities for the misguided youth. And so he also talked about all those things, and he also asked the security agencies to prepare a comprehensive list of the key suspects who are inciting violence, so that the National Security Act 1980 can be used against such individuals to prevent or to arrest this large scale violence and unrest that has been taking place in Manipur, right? So we'll try to understand what exactly is National Security Act of 1980. So there is a probability that you may get a prelims question on this, and you will even get a mains question as well, right? So it is very often considered as unconstitutional, or it is even considered as, I won't say unconstitutional, but it is considered as extrajudicial, because government very often uses this, and it is also considered as draconian because it is inspired from the colonial times, British restrictions. So National Security Act was passed in the year 1980 during the tenure of Indira Gandhi, right? So earlier, during the tenure of Indira Gandhi itself, in the year 1971, there was an act similar to the National Security Act was passed. So that was Maintenance of Internal Security Act. Maintenance of Internal Security Act was passed by the Indira Gandhi government in the year 1971. However, it was later repealed by the Janata Party when it came to power in the year 1977. We all knew that an coalition party came to power in the year 1977 after Indira Gandhi imposed emergency, and a prime minister of this Janata Party was Morarji Desai. And when this government came to power, it has repealed the Maintenance of Internal Security Act 1971. So after a brief period of this Janata Party's rule, again Indira Gandhi government came to power. And when Indira Gandhi government came to power, she has passed the National Security Act of 1980, right? So she passed the National Security Act of 1980, and it is also to some extent similar to the Maintenance of Internal Security or MISA Act of 1971. Now, what is the main tenet of this particular National Security Act of 1980? So if you could understand the main tenet, it empowers the central as well as state governments to detain individuals, right? So central and state governments can actually detain individuals under the National Security Act of 1980 to prevent some activities which could jeopardize the national security, and it could even disrupt the public order that is existing, right? So remember that it empowers not just the central government, but it also empowers the state government also to detain individuals, right? So who could jeopardize national security and also creating disruptions to the public order. And what is the constitutional basis of this National Security Act 1980? So that we should try to understand. Article 22 clause 3 of the Indian Constitution, so it allows preventive detention for state security and public order, right? So for states security and public orders, for the maintenance of public order, and also to take care of the national security or the state security, Article 22 clause 3 allows preventive detention. Now, what is a preventive detention? So it essentially means that an individual is not yet committed a crime, but it is anticipated that this individual would commit a crime, and because of that reason, in order to prevent that crime, it is important to detain individual, and that is the preventive detention. And Article 22 clause 3 provides for, or it allows for, the preventive detention of individual. And secondly, Article 22 clause 4, it restricts detention beyond 3 months. So you should also understand this. So detention should not be more than 3 months. The preventive detention should not be more than 3 months as part of 22 clause 4 of preventive detention. However, so the detention of an individual can be more than 3 months if it is approved by an advisory board, and that advisory board consisting of High Court judge. Now imagine that person A is arrested by the law enforcement agencies under the preventive detention. Right? So he is arrested by the law enforcement agencies under preventive detention under Article 22 clause 3 of the Indian Constitution, because it allows the preventive detention. So however, here, so if the law enforcement agencies wanted that this individual A should be detained for more than 3 months, then the law enforcement agencies must take the approval of an advisory board, and this advisory board comprising of the High Court judges. So otherwise law enforcement agencies cannot detain an individual. It is very clear. Now however, the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act that was passed in the year 1978 during the Janata Party government, it has reduced the detention period without the advisory board approval to 2 months, though this provision is not yet enforced. Okay, so however, we have discussed that this is for 3 months earlier, Article 22 clause 4, but Janata Party government through 44th amendment, it has been reduced to 2 months, but this has never been implemented or not yet implemented even though it has been passed. Right now, what are the key provisions of the National Security Act? So it is very important that we should understand the key provisions of the National Security Act. Now, the key provisions including a detention can extend up to 12 months. So initially the period would be 3 months and it can be extended up to 12 months subject to fresh evidence for further extension. So fresh evidence in the sense that whatever purpose that a person is being detained by the law enforcement agencies, by the government, there is an evidence that even if that person is released, then this person would commit a crime, and that would that would disrupt the public order, and that would also threaten state's security as well. So if there is such an evidence, then a person can be denied or detained up to 12 months if there is such evidence existing. And in fact, no formal charges are necessary during the detention period. So earlier, not earlier, for example, in certain civil cases and criminal cases, so there are certain formal charges. So that could be told to the arrested individual or detained individual, right? So however, detention is permissible to prevent disruptions to public order and even also to ensure supplies and services which are essential for the community. Now, in case that if it threatens the national security, if it threatens, there are some aspects. For example, if it threatens national security, and apart from national security, if it threatens national defense, and if it threatens relations with other countries, and if it threatens public order or disrupts public order, a person can be, these are some grounds. Okay, so these are some grounds which are being mentioned. If that particular person is a threat to these dimensions or these aspects, so then the individual can be arrested under preventive detention, right? So preventive detention, the individual can be arrested under preventive detention policy. And under section 3 of the Preventive Detention Act, National Security Act 1980, both central and state governments has the power to order any person's detention and detain them if it thinks that it is necessary to prevent them from harming all these different aspects that we have just talked about. However, the National Security Act 1980 is not without criticism, because it is time and again criticized. Authorities have been accused of using National Security Act as an extrajudicial power. So the governments have been started using the National Security Act as an extrajudicial power to sometimes even to curb the dissent, and detainees are often held without the formal charges, and that would further leads to concerns about the human rights violations, right? So these are the important criticisms against the National Security Act of 1980. Now, coming back to the Manipur issue, through imposition of the National Security Act, the security agencies will identify a dossier list of individuals who are disrupting the public order, and they're creating, they're threatening the national security, and so they will be arrested under the National Security Act of 1980, and that is what Ajay Kumar Balla, the new governor of Manipur, has suggested, right? So a day after assuming charge, Manipur Governor Ajay Kumar Balla held a security review meeting. So we have just discussed about that. And in this security review meeting, Manipur Governor Ajay Kumar Balla has suggested to impose or arrest individuals under the National Security Act of 1980. And in fact, so what are the certain issues which are being highlighted in this security review meeting by the governor? And in fact, this meeting has highlighted a ceasefire violations by the Pambi faction of the UNLF. So UNLF is a one insurgent group that is based in Manipur, and this is to some extent responsible for such a large scale violence in Manipur. However, it was earlier signed a peace agreement or peace pact in November 2023 with the union government. So despite signing a peace pact, it has never maintained a ceasefire, particularly with respect to use of violence, and it still continued to use violence. So it is a ceasefire violation on the part of UNLF, and it is an insurgent group, and that has been advocating the secession for Union of India. And even buffer zones have created since June 2023 to prevent clashes between Meiteis and Kuki-Jo Hills. Right, so this is another major issue that has been leading to the large scale violence. And so buffer zones have been created, but the concern is that these buffer zones also experiencing large scale violence between Kuki and Meiteis, and in fact there is an intermittent firing between these two communities, particularly from the bunkers in strategic locations. That has also further fueled tensions. But in the security review meeting, Governor of Manipur has reviewed all these aspects. But here it is important that we need to understand about the National Security Act. So next, recently Union government has brought in draft personal data protection rules. Now we need to understand what are the basic tenets of the draft digital personal data protection rules, because this is very important for the general studies paper 2. It is very important, and not just general studies paper 2, for paper 3 is also a very important topic. So let's try to discuss this topic as well. Now the government of India has released draft digital data personal rules. Okay, so it has draft personal data protection rules, and these rules are released under the Digital Data Protection Act of 2023. So as of now there's a Digital Data Protection Act. So this draft personal data protection rules have been released under the Digital Data Protection Act of 2023, and in fact this draft personal data protection rules have outlined some provisions for data privacy, compliance, and even processing mechanisms. So all these things are being outlined in a very detailed manner. Now we'll try to understand what are the major provisions of these draft rules and why these rules are very important for us. Now these draft rules on personal data protection have mandated parental consent for children's data. So children who are below 18 years of age, so parental consent is necessary, particularly social media and online platforms. So they must obtain verifiable parental consent before children create their account, right? So if any child who is 18 years below, and if he is very active in social media, so that actually requires the parental consent, and this is what the draft digital personal data protection rules have mandated. And apart from that, parents' age and identity must be validated through government issued identity proof. So it is very important that it is being identified or it is being validated through the government issued identity proof. For example, imagine that a child wanted to install a social media app X, right? So social media app X, a child wanted to install in his or her mobile phone. Now when he installed that, then it would ask for the parental consent, because you are a child and it requires a parental consent. So then what happens is that the child need to enter his or her father's or mother's Aadhaar number or a phone number, and then a message will be sent saying that some of his kids, some of your kids have downloaded this app, so whether you are giving your consent or not, something like that, right? So such kind of mechanisms are being established, so that the you know in fact, there's no regulation when it comes to children and their activity in the social media platforms. And in recent times, addiction of children to the social media platforms is one of the main concerns. So in order to address this is important, right? So it also talks about health. Mental health establishments, education institutions and daycare centers are exempt from this particular requirement, right? So they are being exempted from the requirement that we have just about talked about, right? So in fact, the draft personal data protection rules also talked about data fiduciaries, data processor, and even what is critical personal data, data processing, and even data principal. Now here it is very important for us to understand who is a data fiduciary, who is data processor, and what is data processing. So we need to understand everything. Now data fiduciary is one who decides the purpose of data processing. So who is called as data fiduciary, and data processor who processes data on behalf, and data principal is individual whose data is being processed, and data processing is personal data and sensitive personal data and critical personal data, including categories of data which requires most protections as defined by the Personal Data Protection Act. Now in this context, what are the roles and responsibilities of the data fiduciaries? So it is very important for us to understand what are the roles and responsibilities of these data fiduciaries. Now entities which have been collecting the information, and once they collect the information, they start processing the personal information, so they are being categorized as data fiduciaries, because they collect the information and then they process the information. And who are the significant data fiduciaries? It is also very important for us to understand and identify the significant data fiduciaries as well. So significant data fiduciaries are those who are processing high volumes of sensitive data impacting national security and public order, and they are being called as significant data fiduciaries. And apart from that, it also talked about the security measures to protect the personal data of individuals, particularly fiduciaries who collect and process the data or the information must ensure encryption, right? So encryption ensures safety and security of the information that is being collected and processed, and access control and even monitoring for unauthorized access. And even entities which are being entrusted to manage consent records must comply with the robust verification process as well, right? So they need to have a robust verification process. And a grievance redressal mechanism has also been set up. Data fiduciaries, so they must establish certain mechanisms to address the grievances and also allow the withdrawal of the consent. And after it is very important to have a committee, and that will determine the categories of data that can be restricted from the cross-border transfer. So what kind of a data that could be restricted from the cross-border transfer? And this plays a very important role in the data localization. Data localization, right? So personal data should not be transferred to cross borders to other nations. So this is part of the data localization, and government will form a committee, and that particular committee will determine the categories of data restricted from the cross border transfer. And apart from that, what if data is being breached, right? So uniform treatment of all the breaches, so there will be no difference between minor data breach or major data breach. So there will be a uniform treatment for all the data breaches, and all data breaches require immediate reporting as well in order to ensure that the data is adequately protected. Personal data is adequately protected. And the next topic is no detention policy. This is an article which is given in the Hindu newspaper. So, what is a no detention policy and why the center again brought in the detention policy? Right? Why center again, Minister of Education again brought in the detention policy, right? Particularly students, who failed class 8 examination, class 5 examination, so they have to write the exam again. So they will not be transferred or promoted to the next class if they failed in the exam. So that is what is known as the detention policy, right? So detention policy. However, what is no detention? So even if they fail in class 5, class 6, 7, 8, so they will be no those students will not be detained in the same class, so they will be promoted even if they failed. Now generally what happens, if students are promoted to the next classes even if they failed in those respective classes, so it would result in poor learning outcomes of the children or the students, and lack of accountability on the part of the teachers as well, because teachers are also promoting students from one class to another class, and that has been creating some fundamental issues here. So we'll try to discuss that. In December 2024, union government has amended the rules of Right to Information Act of 2009. Right to Information Act was passed in 2009. However, in 2024 December itself, the Union government has amended the rules under this act. So, as per the amended rules, schools, including the central government run schools, to detain students if they failed in class 5 and class 8. So, a final year end exam, right? So, year end exam will be conducted in class 5 and class 8. So, if they fail in those exams, so they will be detained in the same classes. So, they will appear for the next exam in those same classes. So if they don't pass the exam, they will not be promoted to the next classes, and that is the policy, that is the amended rules of the RTE Act 2009. And students will have a second chance to pass through a re-examination. So a re-examination will be conducted, and students, so it is also known as a supplementary examination. A re-examination will be held, and students need to pass the re-examination after 2 months of additional teaching. And this move actually aligns with 2019 amendment that rolled back RT Act's no detention policy. However, Right to Information Act 2009 has actually mandated that there should be no detention policy. However, in 2019, certain amendments were made to the RTE Act, no detention policy, and in fact, 18 states and union territories already reinstating the option to detain students. Right, so they're already thinking about detaining of the students. And what is the rationale behind the no detention policy? Now, why the center suddenly decides on this no detention policy? There are some reasons for that. You know, in fact, the original no detention policy can be traced back to the Right to Education Act of 2009 and Section 16 of the RTI Act. So, RTE Act, Right to Education Act, Section 16. So, that prohibited detention and even expulsion of students from class 1 to 8, even if they fail the examination. Right? So, even if they fail the examination, the school should not detain the students, the school should not expel the students under section 16 of RT Act. Now why RT Act has included such a provision, right? So it is because of creating a stress-free learning environment for students. So stress-free learning environment will reduce the mental tension, mental pressure, and even the suicidal tendencies among the students, exam pressure among the student. So it would create a healthy learning environment or stress-free learning environment, and that could positively impact the learning outcomes of the students as well. So that is the rationale. Okay, so This could be a shift away from high pressure single exam assessments. So this is the rationale that Right to Education Act has actually used when it says that there would be no detention policy. However, this no detention policy has been misinterpreted by the teachers. It has been misinterpreted by the students, parents, and governments, right? So it has the schools and teachers and even the governments have started taking the no detention policy less seriously. So many schools have misapplied the policy, and that has been leading to the absence of testing and even reduced accountability for the teaching outcomes as well. So now teachers are less accountable, right? So if students are not detained, even if they don't pass the examination, then teachers will be less accountable, right? So teachers will come, they will teach, and they will promote you to the next class. There will be no accountability on the part of the teachers. And in fact, government schools often promoted students automatically without assessing whether they are acquired grade specific skills or not. So even if they have, without checking that even if they have knowledge or not, even if they have specific skill set or not, so the governments or the schools started promoting these students. And in fact, there are certain implementation issues as well, right? So efforts to introduce continuous and comprehensive education or evaluation with the support of UNICEF were hindered by inadequate resources that are existing at the school level, lack of teacher training, and even lack of commitment on the part of the governments, teachers, and even the schools. And in fact, experts have highlighted that the poor implementation of this no detention policy and continuous and comprehensive evaluation have led to decline in teaching standards and even the learning outcomes of the children. So these are some problems. However, a call for timely remedial action through rolling back this no detention policy. The government has decided to roll back no detention policy and introduce the detention policy by detaining students who don't pass the final year exam. So sorry, a final year exam in class 5 and class 8. So regular assessment must be conducted at the school level, and that is very important for every class, not just class 5 and class 8, but for all the classes, regular assessment of the students must be done so that the progress of the student can be tracked regularly, rather than relying on board level evaluation of students. Secondly, class teachers are required to identify the learning gaps. For example, students have certain learning gaps, and because of that reason, so it would lead to their poor performance and their learning outcomes are also not very good. So it is the responsibility of the teachers to identify those learning gaps and also provide specialized inputs at the various stages. And school heads are mandated to personally monitor the progress of children who are held back, and introducing more accountability on the part of the teachers is also very, very important to create a stress-free learning environment or a healthy learning environment. So that would further improve the learning outcomes of the children. And detaining students would punishes them for not performing well, right? So it is being viewed as a punishment for not performing well in the year end exam. Instead of addressing the root cause, we need to identify the root cause and we'll try to address that particular problem instead of just looking at this detention as detaining students as a just a punishment. And in this context, students, teachers have a larger role, and they need to be held accountable for inclusive teaching. And they should also focus on all students, including those from disadvantaged backgrounds as well. So they need to introduce rigorous teacher appraisal to ensure inclusivity and also fairness in teaching. So these remedial actions must be taken at the school level, and that is also very important to create a healthy learning environment and also focus on improving the foundational literacy and the numeracy of children. That plays a very, very important role in creating better futurists, better students in the future. And that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. So if you like our work, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.